The blood-soaked bandana around Theodora Wilson's face did little to stem the bleeding as she stumbled into Del Rio, Texas, in the summer of 1876, seeking refuge from the outlaw who'd marked her for life, never imagining that the same town harboring her darkest shame would soon witness her greatest love. The dust of the road clung to Theodora's skirts as she made her way down Del Rio's main street. Her trembling fingers clutched the worn leather satchel containing everything she owned in the world. The wound on her face throbbed mercilessly beneath its makeshift covering. 3 days on the run had left her exhausted and feverish. The townsfolk stopped to stare at the strange woman with the blood-stained cloth wrapped around the lower half of her face. Whispers followed her like shadows. Another drifter, probably trouble. What's she hiding under that rag? Theodora kept her eyes downcast, pushing forward through their scrutiny. The summer heat was oppressive, the sun beating down on her shoulders like a physical weight. She hadn't eaten properly in days, and her vision swam as she approached what appeared to be a boarding house. The painted sign swinging above the porch read, "Widow Abernathy's Boarding House." It wasn't much to look at a 2-story wooden structure with peeling white paint and a sagging porch, but to Theodora, it represented her last hope. She had just enough money for a week's lodging, if the rates were reasonable. As she climbed the steps, her knees buckled beneath her. The last thing she remembered before darkness claimed her was the sound of the door opening and a woman's startled gasp. When Theodora awoke, she found herself lying on a narrow bed in a small, clean room. Sunlight filtered through lace curtains, casting dappled patterns on the wooden floor. For a moment, panic seized her as she realized the bandana was gone from her face. Her hand flew up instinctively to cover the wound. "I wouldn't touch that if I were you," came a stern but not unkind voice. Theodora turned to see a stout woman in her 50s sitting in a rocking chair beside the bed. Her silver-streaked hair was pulled back in a tight bun, and her eyes, though wary, held genuine concern. "I'm Martha Abernathy," the woman said. "You collapsed on my doorstep yesterday afternoon. Dr. Jenkins cleaned and stitched your face, but you'll want to keep it covered for a while yet to prevent infection." Theodora's fingers found a clean bandage covering her right cheek. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice hoarse from disuse. "I can pay for the room and the doctor." Martha Abernathy's expression softened slightly. "We'll discuss that later. For now, you need rest and something to eat. What's your name, child?" "Theodora Wilson." She hesitated, then added, "I'm looking for work. I can sew, cook, clean, anything honest." "Well, Miss Wilson, Del Rio isn't exactly overflowing with opportunities for a single woman, but we can figure something out once you're recovered." Martha stood, smoothing her apron. "There's fresh water in the pitcher if you're thirsty. I'll bring up some stew shortly." After Martha left, Theodora gingerly touched the bandage again. The doctor had done his work while she was unconscious, and she was grateful for that small mercy. The thought of someone examining her ruined face made her stomach clench with shame. The injury was recent, barely a week old, but in that short time, it had completely altered the course of her life. Before, she had been a schoolteacher in a small town outside of Austin. She had prospects, respectability. Now she was a fugitive, marked by violence, hiding in a strange town where no one knew her past. As promised, Martha returned with a tray of stew, bread, and coffee. She set it down on the bedside table without comment, but her eyes lingered on Theodora's bandaged face. "If you don't mind my asking," Martha said carefully, "who did that to you?" Theodora's hand trembled as she reached for the mug of coffee. "A man who didn't take kindly to being refused," she said simply. Martha nodded, understanding immediately. "Well, you're safe here for now. Eat, rest. We'll talk more tomorrow." The next few days passed in a blur of sleep and healing. Theodora ventured downstairs only after dark, when the other boarders had retired for the night. She couldn't bear the thought of their stares, their questions. When she did encounter anyone, she kept her face partially covered with a scarf, eyes downcast. On the fourth day, Martha approached her with a proposition. "I could use help around the boarding house," she said. "Nothing strenuous at first, just bookkeeping, helping with the washing, that sort of thing. Room and board plus a small wage. What do you say?" Theodora accepted gratefully. It wasn't teaching, but it was honest work, and it would allow her to remain largely hidden from public view. As the weeks passed, Theodora settled into a quiet routine. She rose before dawn to help prepare breakfast for the boarders, spent the mornings cleaning and the afternoons mending linens or balancing Martha's account books. In the evenings, she retreated to her room with borrowed books from Martha's modest library. She still covered her face when in the presence of others, using a combination of scarves and high-collared dresses to shield as much of her injury as possible. The wound itself was healing, leaving behind an angry red scar that pulled at her skin from the corner of her mouth up to her right ear, a permanent reminder of a man's cruelty. Summer gave way to fall, and Del Rio prepared for its annual harvest festival. Martha insisted that Theodora attend, despite her protests. "You can't hide forever, child," Martha said firmly as they sat in the kitchen shelling peas. "Besides, half the town already knows you're here. Might as well face them directly rather than let them gossip behind your back." Theodora's hand stilled. "I'm not ready for that kind of scrutiny." "Nonsense. You'll wear that pretty blue dress we finished last week, and I'll lend you my good shawl. You can arrange it however makes you comfortable." Martha's tone brooked no argument. "The festival only comes once a year. There'll be music, dancing, good food. You might even enjoy yourself." The day of the festival arrived clear and cool. Theodora dressed with trembling hands, arranging a delicate lace scarf to cover the lower portion of her face. Looking in the small mirror above her dresser, she could almost pretend she was whole again if she ignored the scar visible through the lace and the haunted look in her eyes. Martha was waiting for her downstairs, dressed in her Sunday best. "You look lovely," she said, with such sincerity that Theodora almost believed her. The town square had been transformed for the occasion. Lanterns hung from trees, casting a warm glow over the gathering. Tables laden with food lined one side, while a small group of musicians played lively tunes on the opposite end. Children darted between adults, their laughter mingling with the music. Theodora kept to the edges of the celebration, helping Martha serve pie and coffee to the townsfolk. Most nodded politely but kept their distance, respecting her obvious desire for privacy. It was well past dusk when she first noticed him, a tall man leaning against a hitching post, watching the dancing with amused detachment. Unlike most of the men present, he wasn't dressed for celebration. His clothes were dusty from the trail, and the gun at his hip wasn't there for show. As if sensing her gaze, he turned, and for a brief moment, their eyes met across the square. Theodora quickly looked away, busying herself with rearranging plates. "That's Caleb Irwin," Martha said, appearing at her side with an empty coffee pot. "Just rode into town yesterday, staying at the hotel rather than with me, more's the pity. He's cattle business, I hear." "He looks dangerous," Theodora murmured, sneaking another glance. Martha chuckled. "Most men who work the range do, dear. It's a hard life." She refilled her coffee pot from the large urn. "Though I will say, there's been talk of trouble following him. Nothing specific, mind you, just whispers." Theodora felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air. She'd had her fill of dangerous men. "I think I'll head back to the boarding house," she said. I'm feeling tired. Martha looked disappointed but nodded. Take the back streets. It's quieter. Theodora gathered her shawl tightly around her shoulders and slipped away from the festival. The sounds of merriment faded as she walked the darkened streets toward home. She was halfway there when she heard footsteps behind her. Quickening her pace, she turned down an alley that would lead her more directly to the boarding house. The footsteps followed. Heart pounding, Theodora broke into a run. Her pursuer did the same. Just as she reached the end of the alley, a hand closed around her arm, spinning her around. "Whoa there, madam," said a deep voice. "No need to run, I just wanted to return this." In the dim light spilling from a nearby window, she recognized Caleb Irwin. He held out her lace scarf, which must have fallen in her flight. "It blew off back there," he explained, his expression difficult to read in the shadows. "Thought you might want it back." Theodora snatched the scarf with a trembling hand, quickly arranging it to cover her face once more. "Thank you," she managed, voice barely above a whisper. He studied her for a moment, then tipped his hat. "Evening, madam. Get home safe now." With that, he turned and walked back toward the festival. Theodora stood frozen, watching his retreating form. Something about the encounter left her unsettled, not with fear, exactly, but with a strange sense of being truly seen for the first time in months. The next morning, Theodora was arranging fresh flowers in the boarding house parlor when the front door opened. She turned, expecting Martha returning from the market, and instead found herself face to face with Caleb Irwin. Instinctively, she raised a hand to ensure her scarf was in place. "Good morning, Miss Wilson," he said, removing his hat. "I was hoping to speak with Mrs. Abernathy about a room." Surprised that he knew her name, Theodora took a step back. "She's at the market. Should be returning shortly if you'd care to wait." She gestured to a chair, keeping her eyes averted. "Much obliged." He sat, placing his hat on his knee. "The hotel's fine, but a bit rich for my blood if I'm staying more than a few days." An uncomfortable silence fell. Theodora continued with the flowers, acutely aware of his gaze. "Those are nice," he said after a while. "The flowers. You have a good eye for arrangement. Thank you." She kept her responses minimal, hoping to discourage conversation. "I don't mean to make you uncomfortable," he said, his voice softer. "I know what it's like to want to be left alone." Something in his tone made Theodora look up. His eyes held no pity, only a quiet understanding that caught her off guard. Before she could respond, Martha bustled in with her market basket. "Mr. Irwin, what a pleasant surprise. Have you come about a room after all?" The moment broken, Caleb stood. "Yes, madam, if you've got one available." "As a matter of fact, I do. Just had a drummer check out yesterday." Martha set down her basket. "Theodora, would you mind showing Mr. Irwin the blue room while I put these groceries away?" Reluctantly, Theodora led Caleb upstairs to a room at the end of the hall. "This is our best available room," she said, opening the door to reveal a simply furnished but comfortable space. "It has a view of the garden." Caleb stepped inside, surveying the room with a practiced eye. "This'll do nicely, thank you." Theodora nodded and turned to leave. "Miss Wilson," he called after her. When she paused, he said, "I've upset you somehow. That wasn't my intention." She faced him partially, keeping her scarred side angled away. "You haven't upset me, Mr. Irwin. I just prefer to keep to myself." "Fair enough." He studied her for a moment. "But if I might say one thing, whatever you're hiding under that scarf, it doesn't define you." Theodora stiffened. "You know nothing about me. True enough. But I know something about scars." He rolled up his left sleeve to reveal a twisted mass of burned tissue that covered his forearm. "Mine's just easier to cover with a sleeve." Without waiting for her response, he rolled his sleeve back down and turned to examine the room further. Theodora slipped away, unsettled by the exchange. That evening at supper, Martha insisted that Theodora join the boarders at the common table, as she occasionally did. Usually, Theodora ate earlier or later to avoid the group meal, but Martha was firm. "We've got a new boarder, and it's only polite to welcome him properly," she said as they prepared the meal. Theodora arranged her scarf carefully before taking her seat at the far end of the table. Besides Martha and herself, there were 3 other boarders: Mr. Peterson, an elderly accountant; Miss Green, a middle-aged seamstress; and now Caleb Irwin. Conversation flowed around her as Martha served roast beef and potatoes. Theodora kept her eyes on her plate, taking small, careful bites that didn't disturb her scarf. "So, Mr. Irwin," Martha said as she poured coffee, "what brings you to Del Rio? Business or pleasure?" Caleb finished chewing before answering. "A bit of both, madam. I'm here to buy cattle for a ranch up north, but I've also got personal business to attend to." "What kind of personal business?" Miss Green asked, never one to respect boundaries. Caleb's expression remained pleasant, but something in his eyes hardened. "Family matters." The tone effectively closed that line of questioning. Talk turned to local gossip and the success of the Harvest Festival. Theodora remained silent, but she could feel Caleb's occasional glances in her direction. As the meal concluded, Mr. Peterson brought up recent troubles in the region. "Heard there was another ranch hit last week," he said, stirring sugar into his coffee. "Over near Eagle Pass. Second one this month." Martha frowned. "Rustlers again. Worse. They didn't just take the cattle, killed the rancher and his foreman, left the wife alive, though not from any kindness. She's in a bad way from what I hear." Theodora felt the blood drain from her face. The description was too familiar. "Any idea who's behind it?" Caleb asked, his voice carefully neutral. Mr. Peterson shook his head. "Sheriff thinks it might be the Blackridge Gang. They've been moving south, leaving a trail of misery wherever they go." At the mention of the gang, Theodora's spoon clattered against her plate. All eyes turned to her. "Are you feeling unwell, dear?" Martha asked, concerned. "Just tired," Theodora managed, rising from her seat. "If you'll excuse me." She fled to her room, heart pounding in her ears. The Blackridge Gang. Here, so close. The leader of that gang, Victor Blackridge, was the man who had scarred her face when she refused his advances. The man she had been running from. A soft knock at her door startled her from her thoughts. "Theodora, it's Martha. Are you all right?" Taking a deep breath, Theodora opened the door. Martha stood there, brow furrowed with concern. "I'm fine," Theodora said. "Just a headache." Martha didn't look convinced. "You went white as a sheet when Mr. Peterson mentioned that gang. You know something about them?" Theodora hesitated, then slowly nodded. "They're the reason I came to Del Rio, the reason for." She touched her scarred cheek through the scarf. Martha's eyes widened. "Oh, child. Come, sit down and tell me everything." And so, for the first time since arriving in Del Rio, Theodora shared her story. She told Martha about teaching in a small school outside Austin, about the day Victor Blackridge and his men rode into town looking for easy pickings. How he had taken a liking to her, pursued her with increasing aggression, and finally cornered her in the schoolhouse after hours. "I refused him," she said, her voice hollow with remembered terror. "He didn't take it well. Said if he couldn't have me, he'd make sure no man would ever want me. He used his knife." Her fingers traced the path of the scar through her scarf. "One of the older boys from school heard my screams and came running with his father. They drove Blackridge off, but not before he promised he'd come back to finish what he started." She swallowed hard. "I left that night. I've been running ever since." Martha's face was pale with horror. "And now they're near Del Rio. If it's really them," Theodora said, "there are other gangs, but you don't think so?" Theodora shook her head. "The pattern fits, Blackridge doesn't just steal, he destroys. Takes pleasure in it. Martha reached out to squeeze her hand. You should tell the sheriff. And say what? That a notorious outlaw might come looking for me. They'd either think I was lying for attention or run me out of town for bringing trouble. Theodora pulled her hand away. No, I should leave. Go further south, maybe into Mexico. And keep running forever, Martha asked softly. That's no kind of life, Theodora. Before Theodora could respond, there was another knock at the door. Martha opened it to find Caleb standing in the hallway. Pardon the interruption, he said, but I couldn't help overhearing some of your conversation. The walls here are thin. Theodora stood, anger and embarrassment flooding her face. You were eavesdropping, not intentionally. His expression was grave. But I heard enough to know you've had dealings with the Blackridge Gang. That's none of your business, Theodora said, moving to close the door. Caleb put his hand out, stopping the door. Actually, it is, because I've been tracking them for the past 6 months. His words froze both women in place. Are you a lawman? Martha asked. A shadow crossed Caleb's face. Not exactly, but I have a personal stake in seeing Victor Blackridge brought to justice. What kind of stake? Theodora demanded. Caleb's eyes met hers directly. The kind that comes from watching him murder my brother and sister-in-law. The kind that comes from promising my dying brother I'd make it right. The room fell silent as the weight of his words settled over them. I think, Martha said finally, that the three of us need to continue this conversation downstairs, with whiskey. The kitchen was quiet and warm, the rest of the boarders having retired for the evening. Martha poured 3 small glasses of whiskey from a bottle she kept for medicinal purposes and special occasions. Now, she said, settling into a chair at the kitchen table, let's have the whole story, Mr. Irwin. Caleb took a sip of whiskey before beginning. My brother Ethan had a small ranch near Fort Worth. Nothing fancy, but he was building something good for his wife and their son. 6 months ago, Blackridge and his men rode through. They wanted the land for a hideout isolated but with good access to trade routes. His knuckles whitened around his glass. Ethan refused to sell, so they killed him. Killed Sarah too when she tried to protect their boy. And the child, Martha asked softly, my nephew lived. They left him alive as a witness Blackridge's idea of a twisted mercy. Caleb's voice was flat. He's 8 years old, lives with my parents now in Kansas. Theodora's hand shook as she raised her own glass. I'm sorry for your loss, Caleb nodded. Been trailing them ever since, always a step or two behind. Lost their trail completely for a while until I heard rumors they were operating near Del Rio. His gaze shifted to Theodora. Now I know why they came this direction. He's looking for you. The thought sent ice through her veins. You don't know that, don't I? Blackridge is many things, but he doesn't leave business unfinished. You humiliated him, escaped him. In his mind, that's unforgivable. Martha looked between them, her face grim. So what do we do now? Caleb leaned forward. We prepare. And when he comes, because he will, we make sure he regrets it. Are you suggesting we fight? Theodora asked incredulously. I'm suggesting we use his obsession to our advantage, set a trap rather than waiting for him to strike on his terms. Theodora stood abruptly. I won't be bait. I've seen what that man is capable of. So have I, Caleb said quietly. And I'm not asking you to face him alone, but this might be the only chance to stop him for good. Martha reached for Theodora's hand. Child, I know you're scared, but Mr. Irwin has a point. Running hasn't worked so far. Theodora sank back into her chair, suddenly exhausted. What exactly are you proposing, Mr. Irwin? First, we need to confirm if it's actually Blackridge operating in the area. I'll ride out to Eagle Pass tomorrow, talk to the sheriff there. Caleb's expression was determined. If it is him, we'll need to work with the local law. Sheriff Taylor is a good man from what I've heard. And if he doesn't believe us, Theodora asked, then we'll handle it ourselves. The steel in Caleb's voice left no doubt about his resolve. That night, sleep eluded Theodora. She stood at her window, watching the quiet street below, feeling as though her sanctuary had been shattered. The thought of Victor Blackridge finding her filled her with paralyzing fear. Yet somehow, the presence of Caleb Irwin, a man with his own demons and his own quest for justice, gave her a sliver of hope she hadn't felt in months. Dawn was breaking when Theodora heard Caleb leave for Eagle Pass. From her window, she watched him ride out, his figure silhouetted against the rising sun. Despite her misgivings, she found herself praying for his safe return. The day passed with agonizing slowness. Theodora went through her usual routines, helping prepare meals, cleaning rooms, mending linens, but her mind was elsewhere. Martha watched her with concern but said nothing, allowing her the space to process her thoughts. It was well after dark when they heard a horse approaching. Martha peered out the front window, then exhaled with relief. "It's Mr. Irwin." Theodora stayed in the kitchen, hands clasped tightly in her lap as Martha went to greet him. She heard their muted voices in the hallway, then footsteps approaching. Caleb entered first, his expression grim. His coat was dusty from the road and exhaustion lined his face. Sheriff Taylor followed, a weathered man with shrewd eyes and a silver-streaked beard. "Miss Wilson," the sheriff said, removing his hat. "Mr. Irwin has told me about your situation. I'd like to hear your version if you don't mind." For the second time in 24 hours, Theodora recounted her ordeal with Victor Blackridge. This time, halfway through her story, she slowly removed her scarf, revealing the angry red scar that curved from the corner of her mouth to her ear. The kitchen fell silent as the men took in the extent of her injury. "He said I'd never be pretty again," she finished, her voice barely audible. "That no man would ever look at me with anything but disgust." The sheriff's jaw tightened. "Miss Wilson, I've been lawman in these parts for nigh on 20 years, seen all manner of cruelty. What that man did to you," he shook his head, "you have my word we'll bring him to justice." "Then it is Blackridge near Eagle Pass?" Martha asked, without a doubt. The widow identified him from a description. Sheriff Taylor rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "The problem is finding him before he strikes again. His gang is 10 strong and they move camp frequently." "Or we could let him find us," Caleb said, his eyes meeting Theodora's, "on our terms." The sheriff frowned. "You suggesting using the lady as bait? That's mighty risky, Irwin." "Not if we plan it right," Caleb insisted. "Blackridge wants her. Sooner or later he'll hear she's in Del Rio. We can spread the word deliberately, control when and how he comes for her." Theodora's heart pounded painfully in her chest. "And when he does come, we'll be waiting," Caleb said with quiet confidence. "All of us." The sheriff considered for a long moment. "I could deputize some men, set up an ambush." He turned to Theodora. "But it has to be your decision, Miss Wilson." "No one would think less of you for refusing." Theodora looked at each face in turn, Martha's concern, the sheriff's professional assessment, and finally Caleb's unwavering gaze. In his eyes, she saw not just determination, but something else, a belief in her strength that she herself had forgotten. "I'm tired of running," she said finally. "I'll do it." Over the next week, a plan took shape. Word would be spread that a woman matching Theodora's description was living in Del Rio. To ensure Blackridge took the bait, Sheriff Taylor would have one of his deputies mention her specifically while drinking in a saloon in Eagle Pass known to be frequented by the gang's informants. Meanwhile, the boarding house was subtly fortified. The sheriff positioned deputies in strategic locations around town, and Caleb spent hours with Theodora, teaching her how to handle a small derringer. "I'm not expecting you to fight," he explained as they practiced in the garden behind the boarding house. "But if something goes wrong, I want you to be able to protect yourself." The weight of the small gun felt foreign in Theodora's hand. "I've never fired a weapon before." "Most people haven't until they need to." Caleb adjusted her grip. "It's simple: point and squeeze the trigger. At close range, you can't miss." Their fingers brushed, and Theodora felt an unexpected flutter in her chest. Over the past days, she had grown increasingly aware of Caleb's presence, his quiet strength, his unexpected gentleness. He never averted his eyes from her scar or treated her as if she were fragile. "What if I freeze?" she asked, lowering the gun. "When I see him again, I might not be able to move, let alone fire a weapon." Caleb's expression softened. "Fear's natural, Theodora. But you're stronger than you give yourself credit for. You survived what he did to you. You rebuilt a life here. That takes courage." She shook her head. "I've been hiding, not living." "Then maybe it's time to stop hiding." His voice was gentle, not just from Blackridge but from the world. Their eyes met, and for a charged moment, Theodora felt something shift between them. Then Martha called from the house, breaking the spell. "Word's been sent," she announced as they approached. "Sheriff's deputy left for Eagle Pass this morning. Now we wait." The waiting proved to be the hardest part. Days passed with no sign of Blackridge or his men. Theodora jumped at shadows, startled at every unusual sound. Night after night, she lay awake, wondering if this would be the night he came for her. On the fifth night, Caleb found her sitting alone on the back porch, wrapped in a shawl against the autumn chill. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked, settling beside her on the step. She shook her head. "Every time I close my eyes, I see his face. The look in his eyes when he cut me." Her hand drifted to her scar. Caleb was quiet for a moment. "After my brother died, I had nightmares for months. Still do sometimes. Does it ever get easier?" "Not easier. Different." He looked up at the stars. "The pain changes shape, becomes something you carry rather than something that consumes you." They sat in companionable silence for a while, the night sounds of crickets and distant coyotes washing over them. "Tell me about your life before," Caleb said eventually. "Before Blackridge." The request surprised her, but she found herself wanting to share. "I was a school teacher. Loved it more than anything, watching children discover the world through books, seeing their faces light up when they understood something new. You miss it. Every day." She smiled wistfully. "I had 28 students, ages 6 to 16. The schoolhouse was just one room, but we made it work. In winter, the older boys would come early to light the stove so it would be warm when the little ones arrived." As she spoke, memories flooded back, happy ones that had been overshadowed by the horror that followed. She told Caleb about the Christmas pageant she'd organized, the spelling bees, the end-of-year picnics where parents brought their finest dishes and children played games until sunset. "You'll teach again," Caleb said with certainty when she finally fell silent. "No school would hire me now," she said, gesturing to her face. "Parents would complain. Children would be frightened. Children are more accepting than you think. And there are places that need teachers badly enough to look past a scar." He turned to face her fully. "The world doesn't end because one man tried to destroy your beauty, Theodora." "Easy for you to say," she retorted, suddenly angry. "Your scars can be covered with a sleeve. Mine are on display for everyone to see, to judge. You think I don't understand judgment?" His voice remained calm despite her outburst. "The burns on my arm are just the visible part. I've got more down my side, my leg. Got them pulling my nephew from the fire Blackridge's men set. Some days the pain is so bad I can barely mount a horse." Shame washed over Theodora. "I'm sorry. I didn't know." "No reason you should, My point is, we all carry marks, visible or not. It's what we do with them that matters." Before she could respond, a shrill whistle cut through the night, the signal they had arranged with the sheriff. Someone suspicious had been spotted approaching town. Caleb was on his feet instantly. "Get inside. Find Martha and stay in the hidden room we prepared. I'll come for you when it's safe." Heart pounding, Theodora hurried inside. Martha was already waiting, a shotgun in her hands. Together, they made their way to a small storeroom off the kitchen where floorboards had been loosened to create a hiding space. "Be careful," Theodora whispered to Martha as the older woman helped her into the cramped space. "Always am, dear." Martha handed her the derringer Caleb had given her. "Remember what Mr. Irwin taught you." With that, Martha replaced the floorboards, leaving Theodora in darkness. Through the cracks between boards, she could see slivers of the kitchen. She heard Martha move away, presumably to take up her position by the front windows. Time crawled by in the darkness. Theodora's muscles cramped from holding still, but fear kept her immobile. She strained to hear any sounds that might indicate what was happening outside. Then came the distinctive creak of the back door opening. Footsteps, too heavy to be Martha's or Caleb's, moved across the kitchen floor. Theodora held her breath, the derringer clutched in her sweating palm. "I know you're here somewhere, teacher." The voice sent ice through her veins. "Victor Blackridge. Your cowboy friend, and that old woman can't protect you. My men have them occupied elsewhere." Theodora's mouth went dry with terror. Had something gone wrong with the plan? Where was the sheriff, his deputies? Blackridge's boots moved slowly across the kitchen, opening cupboards, checking behind furniture. "Did you think I wouldn't find you? That I'd forget what you did?" he chuckled, a sound devoid of humor. "I've been looking forward to finishing our business." He was directly above her now. Theodora could see the worn leather of his boots through the cracks, could smell tobacco and whiskey, and something worse, a metallic hint of blood. "There's nowhere left to hide, Theodora." His voice dropped lower. "I've already dealt with the sheriff's men. Your friends will be joining them soon enough." A cold certainty settled over Theodora. Blackridge was separating her from her allies, isolating her. If she stayed hidden, others would pay the price: Martha, the sheriff, Caleb. She couldn't let that happen. With trembling hands, she pushed against the floorboards. They lifted easily, and she emerged from her hiding place like a ghost rising from a grave. Blackridge stood across the kitchen, a knife similar to the one he'd used on her face dangling from his fingers. His expression registered surprise, then triumph. "There's my girl," he said, lips curling into a cruel smile. "Let me see what I've done to that pretty face of yours." Theodora straightened to her full height, the derringer concealed in the folds of her skirt. For the first time since the attack, she faced someone without attempting to hide her scar. "You've taken enough from me," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "I won't let you hurt anyone else." Blackridge laughed. Brave words from a marked woman. "What exactly do you think you can do to stop me?" "This," Theodora said, raising the derringer and firing in one swift motion. The shot caught Blackridge in the shoulder, spinning him back against the wall. He roared in pain and fury, lunging toward her with his knife. Theodora scrambled backward, but her skirt caught on a chair. She tumbled to the floor, the empty derringer flying from her hand. Blackridge loomed over her, blood seeping through his shirt. "You'll pay for that," he snarled, raising the knife. A gunshot rang out, much louder than her derringer had been. Blackridge staggered, a look of confusion crossing his face. A red stain blossomed on his chest. He turned slowly to see Caleb standing in the doorway, revolver still raised. "That's for my brother," Caleb said coldly. Blackridge took one faltering step toward Caleb before a second shot dropped him to the floor. Theodora couldn't move, couldn't speak. She stared at the body of the man who had haunted her nightmares for months, now lying still on Martha's clean kitchen floor. Caleb crossed to her, helping her to her feet. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head numbly. "You said he had men with him. The sheriff's got them cornered at the saloon. It's over, Theodora, truly over." The reality of it washed over her in waves: relief, disbelief, and finally, a sense of release so profound it brought tears to her eyes. She collapsed against Caleb's chest, sobs racking her body. His arms came around her, strong and secure. "It's all right now," he murmured into her hair. "You're safe." In the days that followed, Del Rio buzzed with talk of the showdown. The Blackridge Gang had been broken, most of its members killed or captured in the firefight at the saloon. Sheriff Taylor praised Theodora's courage, though she felt she had done little enough. "You stood your ground," he told her when he came to take her statement. "Most men wouldn't have had the nerve to face down Victor Blackridge." Martha fussed over her like a mother hen, insisting she rest and recover from the ordeal. But Theodora found she didn't need much recovery time. For the first time in months, she slept deeply, without nightmares. What surprised her most was her changing relationship with her scar. She began experimenting with wearing her hair differently, sometimes using a light scarf, sometimes leaving her face entirely uncovered. The townsfolk's reactions varied. Some still stared. Others pointedly looked away, but increasingly, she found she cared less about their opinions. A week after Blackridge's death, Theodora was tidying the boarding house parlor when Caleb appeared in the doorway. He had been busy helping the sheriff track down the remaining members of the gang, and she hadn't seen much of him. "Got a minute?" he asked, looking uncharacteristically hesitant. Theodora set down her feather duster. "Of course." He gestured toward the front porch. "Thought we might get some air." They settled on the porch swing, watching the quiet street. Fall was deepening into winter, and there was a crisp edge to the air. "I've been meaning to thank you," Theodora said, breaking the silence, "for everything you did." Caleb shook his head. "You're the one who drew him out, stood up to him. We all played our parts." She smiled slightly. "Martha's already planning a celebration dinner to thank the sheriff and his men." Another silence fell between them, not uncomfortable but weighted with unspoken thoughts. "I'll be leaving soon," Caleb said finally. "Got some business to finish up north, need to see my nephew." Though she had expected this, Theodora felt a sharp pang of disappointment. "Of course, your family must be waiting for news." "They are." He turned to face her directly. "But I was thinking I might come back if there was a reason to." Theodora's heart quickened. "What kind of reason?" "You." The word was simple, direct. "I've grown fond of you, Theodora, more than fond." She looked down at her hands, a mixture of hope and fear swirling within her. "You feel sorry for me, protective maybe, but that's not the same as look at me," Caleb interrupted gently. When she raised her eyes to his, he continued, "I don't feel sorry for you. I admire you. Your courage, your kindness, your resilience. And yes, I find you beautiful." Theodora flinched at the word. "Don't mock me." "I would never." He reached out slowly, telegraphing his movements, and lightly traced the path of her scar with his fingertips. "This is part of you, but it's not all of you. When I look at you, I see your eyes first, how they light up when you talk about teaching. I see your smile, how it starts small, like you're not sure you have the right, then blooms into something that could outshine the sun." Tears welled in Theodora's eyes. "No one has ever said such things to me." Then they weren't really looking. His hand cupped her face, thumb gently wiping away a tear that had escaped. "You're beautiful to me, Theodora, scars and all." The words broke something open inside her, a door she had thought permanently sealed. Without thinking, she leaned forward and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was tentative at first, then deepened as Caleb pulled her closer. When they finally parted, both were breathing faster. I don't want you to go, Theodora whispered against his lips. Then I'll come back, he promised. As soon as I can. The winter passed slowly. Theodora threw herself into work at the boarding house, but also began venturing out more into the community. She volunteered to read to children at the general store on Saturday mornings, hesitant at first about their reaction to her appearance. To her surprise, the children barely seemed to notice her scar after the initial curiosity. Did it hurt? One little girl asked bluntly during the first session. Yes, Theodora answered honestly, but it doesn't anymore. The child nodded, apparently satisfied, and the moment passed. By the third week, Theodora found herself surrounded by eager listeners whenever she appeared with a book in hand. Meanwhile, she and Caleb corresponded regularly. His letters detailed his journey north, his reunion with his family, his plans for the future. Each one ended with a reassurance that he was counting the days until his return to Del Rio to her. Theodora kept his letters tied with ribbon in her dresser drawer, reading them on nights when she missed him most acutely. His words sustained her through the winter months, giving her something she had lost months ago: hope. As spring approached, Martha noticed a change in Theodora. "You're blooming, child," she said one evening as they shelled peas for dinner. "And I don't think it's just the season." Theodora smiled, no longer self-conscious about how the expression pulled at her scar. "I feel different, lighter. Love will do that to a person." Martha's eyes twinkled knowingly. Instead of denying it, Theodora nodded. "I never thought I'd feel this way again. After what happened, I believed that part of my life was over." "The heart is remarkably resilient." Martha patted her hand. "And Mr. Irwin is a good man. When is he due back?" "His last letter said he should arrive by month's end." Theodora couldn't keep the excitement from her voice. "He's bringing his nephew to meet me." The day of Caleb's expected arrival dawned clear and warm. Theodora spent extra time preparing, choosing a new dress she had made herself, blue calico with white trim, and arranging her hair in a style that framed her face without attempting to hide her scar. She waited on the boarding house porch, watching the road leading into town. When she finally spotted two riders approaching, one tall man and one small boy, her heart leapt. Caleb dismounted first, then helped his nephew down from his pony. The boy looked around curiously, his expression a mixture of wariness and interest. "Theodora," Caleb called, his face breaking into a smile that made her breath catch. "Come meet Thomas." She walked toward them, suddenly shy. The boy watched her approach with wide eyes, his gaze inevitably drawn to her scar. Kneeling to his level, Theodora smiled. "Hello, Thomas. I'm very pleased to meet you. Your uncle has told me so much about you." Thomas glanced up at Caleb, then back to Theodora. "Uncle Cal said you're a teacher." "I was," she corrected gently, "but I'm thinking of teaching again." "Are you going to be my aunt?" The directness of the question startled a laugh from her. Caleb coughed, looking embarrassed. "Thomas, remember what we talked about. Some questions are for later." But Theodora held Thomas's gaze steadily. "I don't know yet. Would that be all right with you if I was?" The boy considered her seriously, then nodded. "I guess so. Uncle Cal smiles more when he talks about you. Does he now?" Theodora glanced up at Caleb, who was looking distinctly uncomfortable. "All right. That's enough from you," Caleb said, ruffling Thomas's hair. "Why don't you go see if Mrs. Abernathy has any cookies in the kitchen while I talk to Miss Wilson?" Once Thomas had run ahead to the boarding house, Caleb turned to Theodora, his expression softening. "You look beautiful." This time she didn't flinch from the word. "I've missed you." "Not half as much as I've missed you." He took both her hands in his. 3 months felt like 3 years. "You're here now," she said, squeezing his hands. "That's what matters." He nodded, then surprised her by dropping to one knee right there in the street. Theodora Wilson, I've had a lot of time to think while I was away, about what I want, what kind of life I'm hoping to build. And I know with absolute certainty that I want you in that life. Theodora's heart thundered in her chest. Caleb, I'm not asking you to answer right away, he hurried on. I know this is sudden and you might need time, but I love you, Theodora. Your strength, your kindness, every part of you. I want to spend my life showing you just how beautiful you are to me if you'll let me. Tears blurred her vision. You don't need to kneel in the dirt to ask me that, she said, tugging at his hands. Get up, please. Looking uncertain, Caleb rose to his feet. I'm sorry if I've overstepped. Theodora silenced him with a kiss, heedless of who might be watching. When she pulled back, both were breathless. Is that a yes? Caleb asked, a smile spreading across his face. Yes, Theodora confirmed, but I have conditions. His eyebrow quirked up. Such as? I want to teach again. Maybe start a small school here in Del Rio. Done, he said immediately. What else? I want us to give Thomas the stable home he deserves, and maybe. She hesitated, then continued with more confidence, maybe eventually siblings to grow up with. Caleb's smile widened. I'd like nothing better. Anything else? Theodora touched her scar, the gesture now more thoughtful than self-conscious. I want to help other women who have been marked by violence, not just physically, but in all the ways that leave scars. We'll do it together, Caleb promised. Is that all? One more thing. She met his gaze directly. I want to be married before the month is out. I've spent enough time waiting for life to begin again. Caleb laughed, lifting her off her feet in an exuberant embrace. Mrs. Abernathy will be scandalized by the rush, but I think she'll forgive us. As if on cue, Martha appeared on the boarding house porch, Thomas at her side with a cookie in each hand. Are you two going to stand in the street all day, she called, or are you coming in to tell me your news? Hand in hand, they walked toward the boarding house, toward Thomas, toward Martha, toward the future they would build together. The wedding took place 3 weeks later in the small church on the edge of town. The entire community turned out, curious to witness the union of the scarred woman and the man who had helped bring down the notorious Blackridge Gang. Theodora wore a simple cream dress, her hair adorned with wildflowers but her face uncovered. As she walked down the aisle toward Caleb, she held her head high, no longer afraid of the stares, the whispers. What once had been a mark of shame now felt like a badge of survival proof that she had faced the worst and emerged stronger. Caleb watched her approach with undisguised adoration. Beside him stood Thomas, solemn in his new suit, proudly holding the rings. The ceremony was brief but heartfelt. When the pastor pronounced them husband and wife, Caleb kissed her without hesitation, his hand gently cradling the scarred side of her face. The celebration afterward lasted well into the evening with music and dancing in the town square. As dusk fell, Theodora found a moment of quiet with her new husband, watching Thomas play with other children. Happy? Caleb asked, his arm secure around her waist. More than I ever thought possible, she answered truthfully. What about you? Any regrets about tying yourself to a marked woman? Caleb turned her to face him, his expression serious. The only marks I see are the ones that show your courage. And I'll spend my life reminding you of that if necessary. I believe you, she said, and realized it was true. The healing had begun long before this day, from the moment she'd stopped running, from the first time she'd faced her fear, from the instant Caleb had looked at her and seen not a scar but a woman worth loving. As they rejoined the celebration, Theodora caught her reflection in a shop window. The scar was still there, would always be there. But now, when she looked at herself, she saw what Caleb saw, not ruined beauty, but beauty transformed. Not a victim, but a survivor. Not a woman defined by one man's cruelty, but by her own resilience and another man's love. In the years that followed, Theodora and Caleb built the life they had envisioned. They established a small ranch outside Del Rio, where Thomas thrived under their care. 2 years after their wedding, Theodora gave birth to twins, a boy and a girl they named Ethan and Sarah, after Caleb's brother and sister-in-law. True to her word, Theodora started a school, initially teaching from their home before the community rallied to build a proper schoolhouse. Her reputation as a teacher grew, drawing students from neighboring areas. She also kept her promise to help other women marked by violence. What began as informal counseling sessions evolved into a network of support spanning several counties. Women who had suffered at the hands of cruel men found their way to Theodora, and through her, discovered their own strength. Caleb supported her endeavors wholeheartedly, often riding for days to bring a woman in need to safety. Together, they created a sanctuary where healing was possible. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Caleb presented Theodora with a special gift, a locket containing miniature portraits of their children, now numbering 4 with the additions of Daniel and Rebecca. "Look inside the lid," he said, as she admired the paintings. Engraved in the gold were the words that had changed her life. "You're beautiful to me." Theodora closed her hand around the locket, holding it to her heart. "After all these years, you still see me that way, even with more gray in my hair and children's fingerprints on my dresses." Caleb's laugh lines deepened as he smiled. "I see you more clearly now than ever before, and what I see is the most beautiful woman I've ever known." As the setting sun painted the Texas sky in shades of gold and crimson, Theodora stood in her husband's embrace, surrounded by the life they had created together. The scar on her face had faded somewhat with time, but its lessons remained a reminder that wounds could heal, that beauty existed in resilience, and that love, when true, saw past the surface to the heart beneath. For the scarred woman who had once hidden her face, afraid to be seen, this was the greatest gift of all, to be truly seen, truly known, and truly loved, exactly as she was.